Hello. Welcome to part 3 of Samhain. That was so cheesy. Alright, so we're going to talk now about how they would celebrate Samhain way back before the Catholics got here. They would build bonfires on hilltops, and everybody in their houses would extinguish their hearths. So, hearth is that fire that's going in the fireplace that you cook on and you sleep next to, and it keeps your house warm. They would, sorry, they would extinguish it. They would put that fire out. And everybody would gather and hang out around the bonfire for this celebration for these couple of nights, and they would stay warm by the bonfire, and everybody was bringing in that last of the harvest, and they're working on getting animals slaughtered so they can start working on pelts and making tools out of bones and processing and storing the meat. They're bringing the harvest in so they can start, preparing that to get stored for the long winter to make sure they had enough food. So this was a big community working together thing. So everybody kind of hung out with each other for 3 days. Okay, 2 days, but you get what I'm saying. So they would all come down at sunset and get together, and they would work and sleep and party and talk and all of that other lovely stuff, right? The druids, the priests, which I'm pretty sure they didn't call them that, but whatever, just go with it, would commune with the dead around this bonfire. They would use the fire to commune with the dead to get predictions about the next year. It's kept everybody warm too, so it worked. What's really cool about this, though, is that after the second sunrise, or, at the end of the second day, so we've gone through sunset to sunset, and after that next sunset, they would start letting the big bonfire die down, and every household would take some coals from that fire back to their houses and get their hearth going again, using that communal fire, that communal energy, which I think is really, really cool. So you have this whole spirit of people working together for the greater good of each other, and everybody gets to take part in that, and I think that's really kind of cool. And you have this constant reminder that this person that you're arguing with, or this person that made you angry, or whatever, you were just working next to him peacefully, a month ago. And here's this fire in your house, in your fire pit, cooking your food and warming your space, and all of those lovely things that having a hearth does inside your house. And it's all because, the coals that you're using could have been the ones that Fred down the street put in the fire, but Joe on the other side of town may have felled the tree, and Jeffrey may have cut it up, and their kids, Juanita and Sean, got together and grabbed the wood that was being chopped up and brought it into the center of town. It was a community effort. And I know I totally threw a lot of English and Hispanic names in there. I'm a teacher. It's all about inclusion there. So it was that feeling of community, and having that constant reminder in your house of how that community is still benefiting you 6 months later. The goal in this time period was not to extinguish that fire until next Samhain. No pressure. So we went through the history. One of the things that's really interesting to me, I am always fascinated how groups of people that had absolutely no contact with each other have the same ideas. So I find it interesting that the Celts, the Romans, and the Mayans and Aztecs were all celebrating a centralized theme in three very different places. And I'm sure it's not just those three places, but I find it fascinating that Celts in Ireland, the Romans in Italy, and the Aztecs and Mayans in Mexico were all celebrating about the same time around the idea that that veil between the living and the dead is at its thinnest, and you can speak to your ancestors. I find that really, really cool. The Romans were coming through. They celebrated what's called Feralia at this time. It was commemorating the dead. It was usually around the same time, end of what we consider October. I mean, they actually called it October, but whatevs. They were celebrating the goddess. It was a celebration of the dead, particularly dedicated to the goddess Pomona, who is famous as she's the goddess of fruit trees, but she is famous for her orchard of apples. So you'll see Pomona come up quite a few times. I'll let you research that one. But it's really interesting that here we have the Romans who are invading England and Britain and Scotland and Wales and Ireland, and they're bringing this idea of Feralia with them, and they're meeting people who are celebrating Samhain at the same time. That had to be kind of a bit of a shock, right? So there's that. It was interesting when the Catholics came along. The Romans brought Catholicism in, and the Romans are coming with Feralia, which they've Christianized Feralia, and they're trying to talk these Celts, these pagans, into giving up their heathenistic ways and becoming Christians. And they do this by saying, "Look, we do this too. Like, we celebrate the same thing at the same time. We must be the same people, which means we're right." And I'll leave it up to y'all to decide how successful they were, because, it is a thing. The celebration of Halloween dates back to, or in this case, Samhain, dates back to the 9th century BCE. So it goes back a really long time. They would celebrate these things like any big get-together at the time. They would have sporting events, and they would have feasts, and we talked about the bonfires. They would tell stories about their dead, about histories of wars and of great people that lived in their lives, and funny stories and not so funny stories, and all of those lovely things. They would sit around that big old bonfire, and they would tell stories and sing songs and eat and laugh and drink and talk and be a community, which is really interesting because we don't do that anymore, and I think that's sad. They started carving jack-o'-lanterns, which I hope by the time you see this, you already know that the Celts used turnips to carve their first jack-o'-lanterns. They didn't, in this case, most of them wouldn't hollow out the inside. That came later, so the early times they just carved the faces in them. The goal of a jack-o'-lantern was to scare away any of the spirits that came through that meant harm to the people that lived in the house. So you would put a jack-o'-lantern on your porch, and or by your front door, and in the windows and anywhere that a spirit could enter your house, in order to keep those evil things out and protect your family. This was a time where, as a community, we're slaughtering animals for, storing the meat for the winters, making sure we have enough stores for everybody to eat over the long winter. We talked about how they're going to reorganize the community so that people that were working in the fields are now working, building houses or tanning the hides or, whatever it is that needed doing. This is the time they would decide who was going to be doing what. So think about it like a big old town hall. They would leave offerings to the Fae so that they would help them through the rest of the year and through the winter in particular. So if you think about this time, winter is extremely cold all the way up there. I don't know where you're watching me from, but I am in South Georgia, where it might snow once every 5 years, and even then it's a dusting. We're lucky if we get a good frost, a handful of times over the winter, and hopefully it's cold enough to kill the cockroaches and the gnats and mosquitoes, but we're not making any promises down here. It does get cold enough that you're wearing a coat. It's not unheard of for it to be 15, 17 degrees Fahrenheit here, but it's not below freezing, which Ireland, come on. So you needed all of the support you could get. So you spent a lot of time leaving offerings to the Fae and doing rituals and things to encourage good and positive things to come into your house. So that's what we're talking about here. And then finally, with my last 5 minutes here, we're going to talk about trick-or-treating. When we're talking about Samhain in the 9th century and much, much later, they would go door to door, knocking on doors, and the people that answered the door would give them treats. But more often, they would go knocking on the doors to offer good tidings and good wishes to the household they were visiting. And they were rewarded with those things with treats. So it's not like typical trick or treat where we do it these days, where we knock on the door and say trick or treat, and people give you candy to keep you from egging their house. Okay, maybe that was just the 80s. Anyway, at the time this was called, trick-or-treating was not a term that came around until the 1920s. And I've learned a thing or two about that since I wrote these notes, but I probably don't have time to talk about it. They would dress up using the animal skins and heads and things that they just got off the animals that they slaughtered. So they would slaughter these animals, they would dress their kids up in the skins and stuff, so that the animals, they would blend in to the animals. And plus, this thing was just walking around the other day, so, it still smells fresh, I guess. They would knock on the doors, they would sing songs and perform things and do things for these people that they were knocking on the doors for, so they would offer those good vibes and that help build that community spirit, not just begging. This was called souling. It wasn't called trick or treat. It wasn't called, whatever. It was called souling. And the kids that walked around and did it were called soulers. S-O-U-L, by the way, soulers. Dressing up in animal hides was called guising, or, disguising. So they were guising. And they were offering all these wonderful things to the people knocking on the door. So I think we need to do that again. Maybe that's why people make you do funky things when you give them, when you go knock on their doors. I don't know. Who knew? Those mean people were actually probably more accurate than we are. Who knew? Alright, so I hope you learned something about Samhain in the last 45 minutes that I've been doing this. And if you have any questions, you have anything that I did not know that I asked, I absolutely would love to hear from you. So, leave me some comments, like, subscribe, hang out, chill out, and visit me on What's Tiff Up To Now. We will talk to you later. Have a great, wonderful, happy Samhain! Bye, everybody!